As a spy, I spent 3 years undercover in the Golden Triangle. And finally, the extraction signal came from my handler and boyfriend. 5 minutes. That's all it would take for us to go home together. Then his voice cut through my earpiece, cold as ice. Plan B. I have to go save Nightingale. She's been compromised. She's my ex-girlfriend. Stay under. Your cover's still intact. You're safe. I snapped the earpiece in two, walked over to the drug lord I'd just hogtied, and spoke to him in a language he'd understand. Let's make a deal. I'll take out your competition. The air was thick with the smell of blood and wet earth. My name is Vivian. I'm a top operative for the Apex Intelligence Organization. Codename, Mockingbird. I'd been undercover for 3 full years in the most dangerous stretch of rainforest in the Golden Triangle. Today was the day it all came together. Spread across the clearing in front of me were a dozen of Hector's men. All of them dealt with. And Hector himself, one of the 3 most powerful drug lords in the Golden Triangle, my primary target, was bound tight against a tree with specialized rope. The look in his eyes was pure terror and confusion. He couldn't understand it. The woman he'd trusted most, who'd been by his side for a year, had turned on him without warning. And done it with terrifying precision. I ignored his stare and glanced at my watch. 5 minutes until the scheduled extraction. My boyfriend, Zane, also the commanding officer on this operation, would arrive at the rendezvous point in 5 minutes with his team. He'd take me and Hector out together. Then we'd go home. I ran my thumb over the plain steel band on my ring finger, feeling calm. Zane had given it to me 3 years ago. He said once I finished this mission, he'd replace it with a real ring. Static crackled in my earpiece. Then Zane's voice came through. Vivian, do you copy? Copy, I answered. My voice was rough from years of keeping it in check. Nice work. Stick to the original plan. Meet at point A in 5 minutes. Understood. I watched Hector. He seemed to catch something from my earpiece. The despair on his face was immediate. Everything was going exactly as planned. But just as I reached up to cut the comm, Zane's voice came back. There was something in it I'd never heard before. Hesitation. Conflict. Wait, Vivian. My stomach dropped. Headquarters just sent through an emergency alert. Nightingale's cover is blown. She's in danger, trapped inside Victor's territory. Nightingale. Roxy. Zane's ex-girlfriend. I didn't say anything. I just listened. The air felt like it had stopped moving. I have to go get her. Zane's voice went cold and flat. She's my ex. I owe her. I laughed. Silently, to myself. So being an ex-girlfriend outweighed the life of a current one. What about us? I asked. My voice came out quiet. Vivian, listen to me. There was an edge of impatience in his tone now. You're safe right now. Your cover hasn't been blown. Hector's already neutralized. All you have to do is stay under and wait for new orders. Safe. I looked around at the bodies scattered across the ground, then back at Hector, who was glaring at me with pure hatred. He was telling me I was safe, here, in the middle of a drug lord's compound, seconds after a firefight. This is an order. All emotion drained from Zane's voice. Execute Plan B. Plan B. A plan he'd never once mentioned to me. A plan built around rescuing his ex-girlfriend, with me as the acceptable loss. I didn't give him the chance to say another word. I reached up and pulled the tiny earpiece free, inch by inch, slow and deliberate. Then, while Hector watched in stunned silence, I took that small device, the one that had carried every order, every promise, every piece of my loyalty, and snapped it clean in half. The line went dead. I walked over to Hector, crouched down, and met his wary, searching eyes head-on. I spoke in the local dialect, the one he'd grown up with, the one that left no room for misunderstanding, one word at a time. Hector, let's make a deal. I'll take out your competition. Victor. The look on Hector's face was something else. It moved through shock, then suspicion, then, just barely visible beneath the surface, a flash of wild excitement. What makes you think you can? He asked. His voice came out rough, strained from the ropes cutting into him. Because I'm the Apex's top agent, and you're my leverage. I said it straight. I didn't give him time to think. I grabbed the knife from his belt and sliced through the ropes binding him. Your men will figure out something's wrong soon and come looking. We don't have much time. I stood up and dusted off my hands. Hector rolled his wrists, working out the numbness where the ropes had cut in. He looked at me with an unreadable expression. What do you want? Direct. That was one of the things I liked about him. I want to survive. And then I want revenge. My voice was calm, but only I knew what kind of rage was burning inside me. Deal. That was all Hector said. He was smart. He knew the situation. Working with me was his only way out. It didn't take long before Hector's men followed the sound of gunshots and found us. When they saw Hector standing there unharmed, with me at his side, everyone froze. Clean this up. Hector pointed to the bodies on the ground and gave the order to his right-hand man. Nothing happened here today. Yes, boss. I followed Hector back to his base, a fortified compound hidden deep in the rainforest. He gave me the cleanest room available and told me to rest first. I didn't argue. After 3 years undercover, it had been a long time since I'd slept properly. But just as I was about to lie down, there was a knock at my door. It was Hector's right-hand man, a guy named Felix. "Madam, the boss asked me to give you this." Felix handed me an encrypted satellite phone. "We'll use this to reach you when there's news." "You already have something?" I asked. Felix nodded, his expression a little off. "Our people dug up some information about Nightingale. Turns out her so-called cover being blown was nothing, just a minor skirmish during an arms deal with Victor's crew. She barely got scratched." Barely got scratched. I repeated those words in my head. It felt like a sick joke. Over a scratch. Zane had thrown away a 3-year operation, and thrown me away with it, over a scratch. "Also," Felix continued, "the Apex's deputy director, Silas, just got off a call with Zane." My stomach tightened. Silas was Zane's direct superior, and one of the most cunning operators inside the Apex. "What did they say?" "Silas told Zane he fully supported the decision to cut you loose. His exact words were." Felix paused. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice one to protect the whole." Sacrifice one to protect the whole. How noble. So that's all I was to them, the one they could throw away whenever it was convenient. I gripped the satellite phone so hard my nails were nearly digging into my palm. "Got it." I shut the door and leaned back against it. My legs gave out, and I slid slowly to the floor. This wasn't abandonment. This was a setup. A complete and total setup. One that my lover and my own organization had built together, just for me. I stayed at Hector's compound for 3 days. I didn't do anything during those 3 days. I just ate, slept, and let my body recover. Hector didn't bother me either. He gave me space and treated me with respect. On the 4th day, Felix came back with the latest intel. "Madam, we intercepted an encrypted exchange between Zane and Roxy." He handed me a tablet. On the screen was the decrypted transcript. I skimmed through it fast, and with every line, I felt something inside me sink a little deeper. Zane Vivian might not be dead. Nothing's come out of Hector's side. Roxy, she has to die. She knows too much. A living mockingbird is a massive liability for us. Zane, I know. But I didn't think you'd actually go through with meeting Victor's people just to make my plan B look convincing. Do you have any idea how dangerous that was? Roxy, if it means getting rid of her and having you back, it was worth every risk. I couldn't read any further. So even the so-called cover blown had been Roxy's own doing, a scheme she'd staged herself. And Zane, my lover, my partner, hadn't just known about it. He'd been part of it. What chilled me even more was the conversation that came next. "Zane, I've already reported to the higher-ups that Vivian leaked part of the operation route during the mission to capture Hector, which caused the mission to fail. Now everyone inside the organization believes she's a traitor." "Roxy. So when is she going to die?" "Zane, I've already arranged it. I tipped off Victor's people in advance about one of the possible routes Vivian might take during the capture operation. If Hector doesn't kill her, Victor's people will." So that rainy night, those cold shots that nearly took my life, they weren't an accident. They were a trap, set by the man I loved, with his own hands. He didn't abandon me. He wanted me dead. I switched off the tablet and handed it back to Felix, my face completely blank. "Thank you." "Madam, are you?" Felix looked at me, stopping himself before he could finish. "I'm fine." I forced the corners of my mouth into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I just want to kill a few people." My existence had become a threat they couldn't ignore. They would stop at nothing to get rid of me. And I couldn't just sit here and wait to die. I went to find Hector. He was cleaning his gold-plated AK when I walked in. He didn't look surprised to see me. "Come to a decision?" he asked. "I want to know what Victor's been up to lately." I got straight to the point. Hector paused what he was doing and looked up at me. "He's been swallowing up several of our operations, and he cut into one of our supply lines with the South American buyers. What you thinking about going after him?" "Know your enemy and you'll never lose a battle," I said. Hector smiled. "I like the way you think. All right, whatever you want to know I'll tell you. I want to know what kind of connection he has with the Apex." Hector's expression shifted. "You think Victor has someone inside your organization?" "Not think," I said, holding his gaze, each word deliberate. "I know. The fact that Zane could so easily leak my operation route to Victor meant the two of them had already built a secret line of communication long before any of this. And Roxy, walking straight into Victor's territory, getting into danger, and then slipping out completely unharmed. That was no coincidence. There was something much bigger buried underneath all of this. And I was right in the middle of it, a pawn they could sacrifice whenever it suited them. Zane and Roxy came for me faster than I expected. On the 5th day, Felix brought news. "Madam, the Apex has sent a 6-person elite squad into the Golden Triangle. The one leading them is Zane's most trusted man, codenamed Bloodhound." I let out a cold laugh. The Apex's resources were supposed to be used against enemies. Instead, Zane was turning them on one of his own, his current girlfriend. It was like someone stealing your house and then beating you with your own furniture. The irony was almost impressive. You're their target. Hector sat across from me, his expression serious. I know. What's your plan? They think I'm the prey. I'll show them who the real hunter is. I met Hector's eyes, my gaze steady. Hector, I need full intelligence support from you and your best team. He didn't answer right away. He just watched me, like he was weighing something. I knew what he was thinking. The intel I'd given him before had impressed him, sure, but it wasn't enough to make him go all in on me. I needed something bigger, something that would make him willing to walk through fire for me. I took a slow breath and spoke. I know where Victor keeps his core ledger. Hector's pupils shrank. In the Golden Triangle, drugs and weapons were currency, but what could truly make or break a drug lord was the ledger. It held records of every illegal transaction, every name in the web of protection behind him. If that ledger ever got out, it meant total destruction. Victor's ledger was the ultimate card, the kind that could flip the entire balance of power in the Golden Triangle. How do you know that? There was a faint tremor in Hector's voice. 3 years ago, when I first came to the Golden Triangle, I spent 3 months working for Victor as an accountant. That ledger, I built it myself. It was the last card I'd been holding in reserve, kept for exactly this moment. I never thought I'd use it to make a deal with a drug lord. But right now, I had no other choice. Hector looked at me, his eyes burning with greed he couldn't hide. He knew exactly what this ledger was worth. With it, he could not only destroy Victor once and for all, he could follow the trail all the way up, getting his hooks into the politicians and warlords who'd been protecting Victor, and swallow every underground operation in the Golden Triangle whole. Why should I trust you? Hector asked. But his tone already gave him away. You don't have to trust me. I stood up and walked toward him, looking down at him from where I stood. You just have to choose. Keep playing these little games with me, testing each other, or work with me and win the whole Golden Triangle. In that moment, I was no longer Vivian, the agent who'd been thrown away like garbage. I was the woman who held Hector's life in her hands. The woman who would decide the future of the entire Golden Triangle, a queen. The canopy of the Golden Triangle did not offer shelter. It only trapped the wet, suffocating heat. The rain had stopped an hour ago, leaving the forest floor a swamp of slick red clay and rotting vegetation that clung to my combat. Boots like wet cement. I pressed my back against the buttress roots of an ancient banyan tree, my breathing shallow, rhythmic, and silent. In my hand, the weight of a customized, suppressed 9mm pistol was a familiar, comforting presence. Felix, Hector's right-hand man, was crouched 50 yards to my left, hidden beneath a canopy of wild banana leaves. He held a thermal imaging scope to his eye, his finger tapping a silent sequence on his radio transmitter. 3 clicks. They were close. Zane's elite recovery squad, the cleanup crew, was moving through the ravine in a tight military wedge formation. I recognized the lead man immediately by his heavy, deliberate stride and the way he swept his rifle. Bloodhound. He was Zane's personal fixer, a man who had spent 10 years burying the Apex's dirty secrets in shallow graves across 3 continents. He thought he was tracking a rogue agent, a woman soft from 3 years of playing a drug lord's mistress. He didn't know he was walking into a kill zone designed by the person who had set the training standards for his own unit. I waited until the second man in the wedge stepped over the tripwire I'd buried beneath a layer of wet ferns. Click. The low, dull thump of a directional claymore mine echoed through the ravine, followed instantly by a horizontal storm of steel ball bearings that shredded the thick foliage and the first 2 operatives in a fraction of a second. Ambush. Bloodhound roared, diving behind a fallen log as his remaining men opened fire, their automatic weapons chewing the canopy to pieces in a frantic, blind panic. But I was already moving. I slipped through the dense brush like a shadow, using the deafening roar of their own gunfire to mask my approach. I appeared behind the 3rd operative, just as he was reloading. My knife went in clean, sliding between his 2nd and 3rd ribs, severing his aorta before he could let out a gasp. I caught his falling rifle, pivoted, and fired a precise 3-round burst into the chest of the 4th man who was trying to flank Felix's position. Bloodhound. I called out, my voice flat, carrying clearly through the sudden, ringing silence of the forest. Your wedge is broken. Your men are dead. Throw down the weapon. Behind the log, 60 yards away, there was a long, tense silence. The only sound was the dripping of water from the canopy onto the blood-soaked earth. Vivian. Bloodhound's voice came back, raspy and filled with a sudden tense disbelief. You're supposed to be running. Zane said you were compromised, hiding in the brush. Zane is a fool who lets his ex-girlfriend write his operations, I said. Stepping out from behind the banyan tree, my rifle pointed steadily at his cover. And you're the idiot who believed him. Toss the rifle over the log or I'll let Felix test his new thermal-guided mortar on your position. A second later, a black M4 rifle was tossed over the log, landing with a soft, muddy thud in the ferns. Bloodhound stepped out, his hands raised, his face pale and covered in sweat. Looked at the bodies of his elite squad, then at me. The smug professional arrogance he usually carried was completely gone. You're a traitor, Vivian, he whispered, his jaw tightening. The deputy director has already signed the burn order. There's nowhere for you to go. I'm not going anywhere, Bloodhound, I said, gesturing for Felix to secure his wrists. I'm staying right here. And you're going to help me write the next chapter of the Apex's history. The cellar of Hector's fortified compound was cool, smelling of damp stone, spent brass and the dry, sweet scent of stored tobacco. Bloodhound sat bound to a heavy wooden chair, his wrists secured with thick, military-grade zip ties. A single lantern hung from the low wooden ceiling, casting long, flickering shadows across his battered face. I stood before him, tossing his decrypted tactical radio onto the wooden table. Between us, Zane's currently at Victor's compound, isn't he? I asked, pulling up a chair and sitting down, my eyes locking onto his. Bloodhound spat blood onto the stone floor, let out a dry, rattling laugh. You think you can take Victor? In his own fortress? He's got 200 armed mercenaries and the backing of the local warlords. You're dead, Vivian. Even if I don't kill you, Silas will send another team. And another. Silas won't be sending anyone, I said, sliding the tablet Felix had given me across the table. On the screen was the decrypted transcript of the exchange between Zane and Roxy, along with the financial ledgers of the offshore accounts Silas had opened in the Cayman Islands, accounts that had received $10 million from Victor's shell companies over the last 6 months. Bloodhound stared at the screen. The defiance in his eyes slowly turned into a cold, hollow shock as he read the lines. Zane and Roxy, he whispered, his voice shaking. They set up the whole operation. The Nightingale rescue. It was a scam. It was a theater, I said, leaning forward. Silas needed a reason to liquidate me because I was getting too close to Victor's core accounting records. He knew that if I stayed undercover for another month, I'd find the paper trail linking his offshore accounts to the drug shipments leaving the port of Yangon. I tapped the screen. So he let Zane and Roxy play their little high society game. They made me the scapegoat, framed me as a traitor, and sent you, their most loyal hunter, to silence me before I could present the evidence to the director in Langley. Bloodhound closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling slowly. The realization that he had been used as a hitman to cover up the corruption of his own superiors seemed to crush what was left of his professional pride. I didn't know, he muttered, his voice cracking. I thought I was bringing in a traitor. I know, I said, reaching down and slicing the zip ties on his wrists with my knife. That's why I'm letting you go. Bloodhound looked up, his eyes wide with disbelief. You're letting me go? Take your radio, I said, pointing to the device on the table. Go back to the border. Contact the director's personal security unit in Langley. Give them these files. Tell them that Silas, Zane, and Roxy have sold out the entire Golden Triangle division to Victor. I stood up, my posture perfect, my face expressionless. And tell Zane that Mockingbird is coming for her ledger. The Obsidian Fortress, Victor's primary stronghold, was situated on a sheer cliff, overlooking the muddy, churning waters of the Ruak River. It was a massive, concrete structure surrounded by triple-layered razor wire, thermal cameras, and armed sentries who patrolled the perimeter with trained attack dogs. But every fortress has a flaw. And for the Obsidian Fortress, it was the flooded drainage system that ran directly beneath the vault room, a system I had helped design 3 years ago when I was working as Victor's accountant. At 2 a.m., in the middle of a torrential monsoon storm that turned the jungle into a deafening gray chaos, Hector's mercenaries launched their attack. They didn't try to breach the gates. Instead, they opened fire on the western watchtowers with heavy machine guns and mortars, creating a massive fiery diversion that drew Victor's primary forces toward the perimeter. While the sky turned red with explosions, Felix and I slipped through the swollen, rushing waters of the drainage pipe. The water was freezing, smelling of rust and mud, but we moved quickly, our oxygen masks keeping our breathing silent. We reached the iron grate directly beneath the vault, used a silent, hydraulic spreader to pop the bars, and pulled ourselves up into the dry, concrete corridors of the subterranean level. The hallway was quiet, lit only by the low red glow of the emergency lights. The vault is at the end of the hall, I whispered to Felix, wiping the water from my suppressed pistol. 2 guards at the console. No alarms must be raised. We moved like ghosts. Felix took the guard on the left, his knife silent as he slid it home. I caught the guard on the right before he could reach his radio. my hand locking around his throat, my pistol firing a single, muffled round into his temple. I stepped up to the heavy, steel vault door. It was a combination lock, one that required a specific algorithmic key based on the daily transaction volume. To any other agent, it would have been an unhackable barrier, but I was the one who had written the algorithm. I entered the sequence, my fingers flying across the keypad with a memory that had been burned into my mind over 3 years of undercover exile. Click. Whir. With a deep, heavy sigh of hydraulic pressure, the massive steel door slowly swung open, revealing the dry, climate-controlled vault inside. On the central pedestal sat the ledger, a thick leather-bound book wrapped in protective plastic, alongside a series of encrypted cold storage drives that held the digital records of every politician, general, and director Victor had bought over the last decade. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly as I picked it up. 3 years of my life. 3 years of blood, sweat, and lies, all contained in this single heavy book. Got it? I whispered into my collar mic. Vivian, Hector's voice came back through the satellite receiver, tight with an uncontrollable, burning greed. Bring it back. The whole golden triangle is ours. I'm on my way, I said. But just as I turned to exit, the red emergency lights in the hallway suddenly flashed yellow, followed by the deep, wailing roar of the primary alarm. The heavy steel door of the vault began to slide shut. Felix, move, I shouted, diving through the closing gap just before the steel door slammed shut, locking us inside the subterranean level. The elevator doors at the end of the hall opened, and a dozen of Victor's personal guards stepped out, their automatic rifles already raised. The firefight in the narrow concrete corridor was short, brutal, and chaotic. Felix and I used the corners of the vault wall as cover, our suppressed weapons, firing with a deadly clinical precision that left 6 of the guards dead on the floor before they could establish a line of fire. But we were out of options, and the only way out was up, through the primary ventilation shaft that led to the central courtyard. We climbed the iron ladder, our hands slick with sweat and rain before kicking open the metal grate and rolling out onto the rain-slicked concrete of the fortress's inner courtyard. The storm was at its peak, the wind howling through the concrete towers, the rain falling in heavy blinding sheets. The floodlights from the watchtowers swung down, pinning us in their bright, white glare. Vivian, a voice called out over the sound of the wind. I stopped. Standing in the center of the courtyard, surrounded by 30 armed mercenaries, was Zane. He was dressed in his black Apex tactical gear, his face tight and pale under the glaring floodlights. Beside him stood Roxy, her white designer jacket wet from the rain, her eyes carrying a spiteful, triumphant gleam. And next to them was Victor, a short, heavy-set man with a gold-trimmed cigar clutched between his teeth. You really are a survivor, Vivian, Zane said, his voice carrying over the wind, though it held a desperate, ragged edge. I thought Bloodhound would have finished you by now. But you just had to come back for the ledger, didn't you? Zane, I said, my voice calm, my hand resting gently on the leather book tucked securely inside my tactical vest. Your cleanup crew is dead. Bloodhound is currently on his way to Langley with the Cayman Islands accounts. Zane's smile faltered, a sudden cold panic passing through his eyes. He looked at Roxy, who had also gone pale. You're bluffing, Roxy hissed, taking a step forward. You're a traitor. Vivian, the Apex has already issued the burn order. No one will listen to you. They won't need to listen to me, Roxy, I said, pulling out the small, encrypted satellite transmitter Hector had given me. Because 30 minutes ago, before I even opened the vault, I used Victor's own server backup to broadcast the complete contents of this ledger to every major intelligence agency in the world. The CIA, the Interpol, the MSS, they all have the names. Now, I looked at Victor, who was standing beside them, including the names of the 3 generals who were planning to coup your territory next month. Victor, they know you've been selling them out to the Americans. Victor's cigar slipped from his lips, landing in a puddle with a soft hiss. He turned his head slowly, looking at Zane and Roxy with a look of pure murderous fury. You, Victor growled, his hand reaching for his gold-plated revolver. You promised me the ledger was secure. You promised me the girl was dead. Victor, wait. She's lying. Zane screamed, drawing his weapon, but it was too late. The courtyard erupted into a 3-way, chaotic slaughter. Victor's personal guards, realizing their boss had been betrayed, opened fire on Zane and Roxy's mercenary units. The sound of automatic gunfire was deafening, the rain-slicked concrete turning into a bloody, chaotic battlefield in a fraction of a second. I dove behind a concrete planter, pulling Felix with me as bullets chipped the stone above our heads, spraying us with sharp gravel. Felix, get to the gates. I shouted over the din. Hector's men are waiting. What about you? Felix yelled back, his rifle firing through the smoke. I have to finish my business, I said. I stood up, my eyes locked on Zane, who was trying to retreat toward the elevator tower, his weapon firing blindly into the crowd of Victor's men. Beside him, Roxy was screaming, her white jacket covered in mud and blood as she tried to crawl away from the line of fire. I strode through the rain, my rifle raised. Zane, I called out. Zane turned, his face wild with panic. When he saw me standing there, his eyes filled with a sudden desperate madness. He raised his pistol, but I was faster. I fired a single round, the bullet catching him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing onto the wet concrete. His gun skittered across the floor, falling into the deep drainage grate. I stepped over him, looking down at his bleeding, trembling form. Vivian, please. Zane sobbed, his hand clutching his shoulder, his eyes wide with a pathetic, crawling terror. We were partners. I loved you, Vivian. I only did it because Silas forced me. He threatened to kill Roxy. Don't lie to me, Zane, I said, my voice cold and empty of any emotion. You did it because you wanted the 30 million Silas promised you. You did it because you thought I was just a pawn you could discard when the game got too hot. Roxy tried to scramble toward his fallen weapon, but I didn't even look at her. I fired a warning shot into the concrete inches from her fingers, making her scream and pull her hand back. The apex is already outside, Zane, I said, looking up as 3 heavy unmarked black helicopters began to descend into the courtyard, their searchlights blinding the remaining mercenaries. But they're not here to save you. Silas was arrested at the airport in Bangkok 10 minutes ago. Zane stared at me, his mouth open, his chest heaving as the absolute reality of his ruin finally crushed his mind. Goodbye, Zane, I said. I turned my back on him, walking toward the landing pad where Hector's men were already clearing the gate, the leather ledger secure against my chest. A week passed. The storm in the Golden Triangle had finally cleared, leaving the river quiet, peaceful, and washed in the warm, golden light of the tropical sun. I stood on the deck of a longtail boat floating down the Mekong River, watching the mountains of the border rise into the blue sky. I was dressed in a simple, dark linen shirt, my hair loose, my face free of the makeup and the lies of my 3-year undercover life. Vivian, Hector said, walking out from the small cabin, carrying a bottle of local beer. He handed it to me, his eyes carrying a deep, profound respect. News from Langley came through. Silas is facing 50 years in a federal penitentiary. Zane and Roxy, they've been transferred to a high-security military prison in the West. And Victor's territory? I asked, taking a sip of the beer. Fully absorbed, Hector smiled, looking out at the mountains. My men took over his primary supply lines yesterday. I'm the only boss left in the Golden Triangle now, and I owe it all to you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box, sliding it across the table toward me. The director and Langley sent this to my contact, Hector said quietly. They're offering to restore your rank. They want to make you the chief of operations for the entire Southeast Asian division. A desk job in Washington, with a 6-figure salary and a full pardon. I opened the box. Inside was my old Apex Gold Star badge, gleaming under the bright sun. I looked at the badge, then down at my left hand, specifically at the plain steel band I had worn on my ring finger for 3 years. With a slow, deliberate movement, I slipped the steel ring off my finger. I held it over the edge of the boat, letting it fall into the muddy, rushing waters of the Mekong River, where it was instantly swallowed by the current. I picked up the Gold Star badge, looked at it one last time, and tossed it into the water after the ring. Tell the director I'm retired, I said, leaning back against the wooden rail. My face relaxed and filled with a quiet, beautiful freedom. Retired? Hector laughed, a low, genuine sound. What are you going to do now, Vivian? I think I'll stay in the Golden Triangle, I said, looking out at the endless green mountains. A queen doesn't need a desk job in Washington when she already owns the jungle. And as the boat drifted down the river, away from the blood and the lies of the past, the sky above us was finally, beautifully free.